The Torah portion which we read this Shabbat is called Parshat Shmini. Parshat Shmini mostly describes the laws and the rules that Aaron and his sons had to follow when they were ordained as priests to lead the ritual life of the Israelites in the wilderness. And tomorrow, if you show up for Eden's bat mitzvah, she'll teach you all about the animals and the birds and the fish that you are permitted to eat. Tonight, we're going to look at a different part of the Parsha. And this is the story of Aaron's two older sons, Nadav and Avihu. So Aaron had four sons, Nadav and Avihu, Eleazar and Itamar. And their jobs were to be the Kohanim. Anybody have a friend whose last name is Cohen? Khan, Kane, Keen, Cohn, Kuhn? Right? If you trace their ancestry back far enough, you will get to Aaron and his sons. A Kohen is a priest. A priest is different than a rabbi in a whole variety of ways. But a priest's job was to serve as a conduit between God's world and our world. It was through the purity of their humanity and the role that they would play in the community that the Israelites and God would be able to connect with each other. And so there was a very ornate ritual that lasted for 8 days that Aaron and his sons had to complete in order to be sanctified and purified to serve the people as priests. This was life or death for the Israelites in the wilderness. If they couldn't establish the priesthood, they would have no way really of figuring out how to connect with God. And then one night, Nadav and Avihu decide they're going to get creative. And so they take their, what are called fire pans, which were like frying pans, and they put some hot coals in the frying pans, and then they put some incense in the frying pan that was not commanded of them to do. They sort of took it on themselves to do something kind of out of bounds, something creative, something that was not commanded them. And they brought this into the sacred precincts of the Holy of Holies, and the Torah says that a fire went out from God and consumed them, and they died on the spot. And Aaron was forced to say and do nothing. Because if he didn't complete the ritual of his sanctification, the whole smash would have been ruined. He had to keep going. And people tried to console him, and the people outside of the priesthood weep, but Aaron and his sons, Eleazar and Itamar, have to persevere. And so the sages take this incredibly difficult passage and they ask the same question you're asking. Excuse me? It's a little harsh. After all, don't we want to reward creativity? After all, shouldn't we, they were just trying to do the right thing. They were just trying to add to what they were doing. How is it that they could be made to suffer such a terrible, horrible, sudden punishment? And so Rashi says, well, maybe they were drunk. The passage just before this incident tells that the priests are supposed to abstain from alcohol. They have to have their wits about them. So maybe they went in, they got drunk and said, let's have an incense party. How many of you have ever gotten really drunk and burned a little incense? How many of you are lying? Okay. So then the Sifra, the Midrashic commentary in the book of Leviticus says, well, maybe they just kind of wanted to be like Aaron and Moses, and they wanted to be the ones to draw God down too. They didn't want to sort of be the backup singers. They wanted to be the lead. They wanted to do the holy things that Aaron and Moses had done. And in the Talmud, they say, well, maybe actually it was a little more sinister than that. Maybe they didn't just want to try to be like Moses and Aaron. Maybe they actually wanted to be Moses and Aaron and take over. What do those old fools know anyway? But ultimately, what Nechama Leibovitz, who is a modern commentator, teaches is something a little different. She says we have to pay attention to this line in the Torah that says, Asher lo tziva otam, that they weren't commanded. And the fact is that what they were doing was what they wanted to do. They wanted to do what felt good for them. They weren't thinking about the needs of the community. They weren't thinking about the needs of the people. They were thinking about themselves and what felt good to them, what would be fun for them, what would be glorious for them, what would elevate their status. And by thinking in that way, they were dangerous. Now, it doesn't sound like what they were doing was so dangerous. A little incense, a little Eish Zara, a little strange fire. How strange could it be? But if we allow ourselves to just do whatever we want, whenever we want, because it feels good, we're going to end up sowing the seeds of the destruction, not just of a tabernacle or a priesthood or a people, but the world. Because what we have done as humanity for far too long is we do what feels good. We do what is advantageous for ourselves. It's fun to drive a really big SUV. And what do we care if it gets 13 gallons to the mile? We live in South Florida, and it's hot. So why not knock the thermostat down to 69? It feels good. And why not have a diet that promotes the consumption of animals that throw extraordinary amounts of methane gas into the atmosphere that causes an enhancement of the greenhouse effect that causes our planet to get a little warmer? It's already hot in South Florida. What do we care if it's another degree or two hotter? Until we find that Antarctica is breaking up, and icebergs the size of counties or states float off into the Atlantic and the Pacific and melt, and then the sea gets a little higher. And we who live in South Florida, where we sit tonight at the high point of Boca Raton at an elevation of 21 feet, laugh at the island communities whose highest elevation is just 8. We realize as human beings that what we have to do is subsume our will, our desires, to the desires of the Holy One, to the yoke of the mitzvot, to do not that which feels good and is fun and is self-aggrandizing all the time, but sometimes to say, actually, I need to sacrifice a little of what I want for future generations to have what they need. That maybe I will sacrifice a little bit of what might be good for me so that future generations will have what they absolutely can't live without. Perhaps what we learn from Nadav and Avihu and from the rest of this week's Torah portion, the Torah itself, is that the right thing to do, the moral thing to do, is sometimes the selfless thing to do, as opposed to the thing that is only for ourselves. Shabbat Shalom.